Hello and welcome to the third part of the FL Studio Basic Music Production Tutorial series. In this part we will be taking a look at music theory and the very basics of how it can be used to create electronic music. Before we start, as a foreword, I'd like to point out that music theory is not an essential. You do not need to know advanced music theory in order to be able to write electronic music. In fact, the music theory used for electronic music is in fact quite simple. Many professional producers do not know music theory well enough to even be able to read notes. So if you do not understand the very extensive, complicated parts of music theory, do not worry. However, when you're first starting out, music theory will make it much easier for you to come up with melodies, chords, and other such progressions, even when you have no inspiration. So I definitely recommend learning how it works if you do not want to spend many hours frustrated trying to come up with melodies and chord progressions. Without any further ado, let's start. The way that music works is based entirely on scales. Now, what exactly is a scale? Well, a scale is simply a sequence of notes that has different intervals between the notes. Depending on these intervals, you can create different scale modes, and there are an incomprehensible amount of them, which is why I will be only going over the most basic two, which are major and minor. I'll explain what those mean shortly. Let us start with the simplest of the scales, the C major scale. If you're on a keyboard, then this is really easy to play. You start on C, and then using the white notes, go all the way up to the other C, which is this one. For the purpose of visual representation, I will draw it in. Here we have the C major scale. If you listen very carefully, you can hear that it is a very happy sounding scale. Chords sound pretty good in it as well. It is very uplifting and very light. It is called a major scale because of this. It is called a C major scale because it starts on C and ends on C. In most basic scales, there are a total of 7 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we don't count the 8 as another note because it is essentially just C but an octave higher. And that is exactly why there are notes that have the same name, just a different number. Because this here and this here, these are all the exact same note. However, they're just in different octaves. It sounds the same, however, just higher. As previously mentioned, the intervals between the notes in the scale dictate what type of scale it is. If we look here, we have some notes that are skipped over and some notes that are put together. These are known as whole steps and half steps. Simply put, a half step is when you go from one note, say a C, to another note, regardless of whether it is black or white. This would also be a half step. And this would also be a half step. As you might be able to guess, a whole step is simply 2 half steps. What that means is that you skip over a note. So we start here, and we skip over a note to give us a whole step. Using this code system of whole steps and half steps, we can create a pattern that will give us a major scale every time, regardless on the note that we start on. If we look here, the pattern of steps for a major scale is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. If we take this pattern and apply it to any note, we can get a major scale with that root note. To prove this point, I will start on the note F sharp. I'll place a note on F sharp, and I'll follow the same pattern. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And as you can hear, that is the major scale. That is all there is to it. Now let us take a look at minor scales. Most electronic music nowadays is in a minor key. Another name for minor is Aeolian, so watch out for that. Let us use the example of C once again. C minor is unfortunately much more complicated than simply using all the white notes. This is what C minor sounds like. As you can hear, it sounds very dark and very depressing. If we compare the C major chord, which we played previously, which is this, to a C minor, we can hear that it instantly turns much more dreary. Let me show you the interval system for minor scales. This is a little bit more complicated to remember than a major scale. The interval system is whole, half, whole, half, whole. Once again, if we use this system, we can write a minor scale in any note we want. Let's start on F sharp like we did last time. I'll place a note on F sharp, then do the following. Whole, half, whole, half, whole. And as you are able to hear, that is the F sharp minor scale. If you memorize the intervals, you can easily create any scale that you want. Now, how exactly is this relevant to electronic music? Well, all music is controlled by the idea of keys and scales. A key of a song dictates what scale you are allowed to use. What that means is that in a song, there is always going to be a scale that the song is based on, meaning that you cannot play any notes other than the ones in the scale that you chose. If I were to write a song in C major, I can only use the notes in C major to compose it and no others. These are just guidelines, so you can break the rules every now and then if it sounds good. However, they're very helpful for coming up with chord progressions and melodies that sound good together naturally. If you were to put something in F sharp minor together with something in C major, it would be chaos and it would not be very pleasant to listen to. For future reference, I will now show you how to count the intervals in a scale, because I will be forming chords and I will be numbering them, so it's very necessary for you to know how these intervals work. The first note in a scale, or the tonic, is known as 1. The second of a scale is just the second note. The third is the third note. Fourth is the fourth note, fifth is the fifth note, and so forth. Using this knowledge, if somebody tells you to create a 1-3-5 chord in the key of C minor, we can do that. We have our C minor scale here, and we can follow the 1-3-5 in order to create a chord. And automatically, that sounds good. If we would have not had a scale that we could have based the song on, at this moment we would be randomly placing notes, figuring out which notes sound good together. You remember how I mentioned that most electronic music nowadays is in fact minor? Well, how exactly is that possible? The minor key sounds very sad. How can you possibly use that for uplifting electronic music? Let me show you how. This is entirely based off of the principle of relativity of scales. Let's start off with the C major scale once again. Coincidentally, there happens to be another scale that uses only white notes. This is known as the A minor scale. Let me draw that out for you. If you listen to the notes, you can hear that it is clearly a minor scale. However, if we analyze them in the piano roll, we see that they in fact use the same notes, they just start on a different note. This is how relativity can be used to create minor scales based off of major scales. Any major scale has a relative minor, and any minor scale has a relative major scale. This can be used to create minor scales when you do not know the notes exactly. In this case, if I didn't know the notes in A minor, I could calculate using the principle that I will teach you in just a bit, that the relative major is C major, and then I can just use C major because it has the same notes and I can just start on a different root note. How relativity works is that the relative minor of a major scale is just the same notes except you start 3 half steps down. Allow me to demonstrate this using the scale of D major. We have not used it yet, so it is a good example. This is the D major scale, using the interval system of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Using the rule that there is a relative minor scale to it 3 half steps down, we can figure out that the relative minor to D major is simply B minor. If we use the exact same notes in the scale, but we start on a B instead of a D because it is 3 half steps down, we get a minor scale. Allow me to demonstrate. That is the relative minor of D major. Similarly, we can use the same principle using minor scales to figure out the relative major scale. If we simply select the scale and drag it to a different one, let's say we will use F sharp minor to find the relative major. Using the knowledge that relative scales are 3 half steps apart, we can calculate that the scale that is relative to F sharp minor is in fact A major. So 1, 2, 3, that's missing 3 steps, and we can fill in the rest using the same notes in the scale. And there we have the A major scale. Hopefully by now you're seeing how you can use these relative scales to create happy songs even if they are in a minor key. Ultimately, it is about starting in different positions of the key. If I compose a song in C major or A minor, the notes are the exact same. However, I'm just starting in different places, giving it that minor feel. Let's talk about basic chords and how we can apply scales to chords. For the sake of simplicity, I will be using the scale of A minor to write these chords. Let me show you a little trick for writing things in certain keys. If you want to write a song in a key that you do not know the notes of, you can use a simple trick to figure out what the notes are. In FL Studio, you can go up to this arrow, click on it, browse under stamp, and find under here all of the scales that you could possibly want to use. Again, the most commonly used one is the minor or the Aeolian scale. These are one and the same thing, however they just have different names for each other. Clicking on it and then clicking on the piano roll will bring up a series of notes. These notes can be dragged to start on whatever note you want, and it will give you helpers to show you where exactly the markers are for the notes. Let's say I wanted to write something in C sharp minor in this case. I just bring it up so that the bottom note is on C sharp, and here it gives us all the notes in the C sharp minor scale. If I want to write something in D minor, I just bring it down so that the lowest note is on a D, and then this will give us all of the notes in D minor. We can use these as helpers by copying and pasting them by pressing Shift and dragging out, copying and pasting them on different octaves, and then we can turn them into what are known as ghost notes. At this moment, if we were to use a different instrument, it would show these as ghost notes. And we can use them by placing them on a silent instrument so that they will not make any sound. Using that, it just gives us guidelines of which notes we are and we're not allowed to use. In this case, I picked the scale of D minor, so let us write in that. What I've done here is I've gone to the kick in the pattern, I've placed the notes in, I've gone to the channel rack, and I've muted the kick. If we play, we can see nothing happens, and we can use the ghost notes to show us where we can place our chords. Let's start this chord progression with a simple D minor chord since we're in the key of D minor. The first note we will place is a D. Generally with chords, the important part is that you're skipping notes between them. This is not always the case, however for most chords you're going to be alternating. This means that you place a note and you skip one. This right now is known as a basic triad. This is because the chord contains 3 notes. If we listen to it, it doesn't sound too bad. If we want, we can expand the chord. As of now, it is a 1-3-5 chord. If you remember the degrees of the scale, it is because this is the 1, this is the 2, but we skip it, this is the 3, this is the 4, but we skip it, and it's a 5, making this a 1-3-5. If we want, we can make this a 1-3-5-7. Using this knowledge, we can make a really giant chord. However, when you add that many notes, it just stops sounding good for certain instruments, so I recommend that you keep it to around 4 or 5 notes usually. At the moment, this is sounding pretty good. This is the most basic way of writing chords. Normally, I would make it more complicated by, say, doing something like this. However, for now, we will just keep it simple. I feel like this chord progression will sound good if we go to an F chord. So that's what we will do next. Remember, place the first note, skip one, place another one, skip one, place another one, and so forth. Hey, it's starting to sound pretty good. We can expand the chord progression by following the same rule. I feel like this chord progression could go well if we start with another A chord. So let us do that. Remember, skipping steps between the notes. If we listen to this from the very beginning, it will sound like this. It's not too bad. Hopefully you're starting to see how you can use these key signatures to compose chord progressions. By skipping notes between different degrees of the chords, you can get chords that are sounding pretty good without having to use trial and error to create your chord progressions. Again, scales and key signatures are only guidelines. You're not forced to use them. However, using them makes your life much easier when you're trying to compose chord progressions that sound good. If you use experimentation, that can work as well. Again, you do not need to know music theory to compose good music. However, it makes the process much easier. This concludes the basic music theory part for this tutorial series. I hope that you found this useful, and I hope that you can see by now how you can memorize different intervals to create different scales, how you can create relative scales to each other, and how you can use ghost notes and scales to easily create chord progressions on the fly. Thank you for watching, and please tune in next time where I will start the actual production part of the series. If you have any comments or would like to offer any input, please do so in a private message or a comment down below, as this is a work in progress and I would greatly appreciate any feedback. See you next time.